So by now, you all should be thinking that you can see how human population growth can be slowed down. As you would expect, the kinds of things we as a society need to do, or we as a global society need to do, is reduce infant mortality and provide basic health care for everyone, elevate the status of women around the world and support the increased autonomy of women, encourage real economic development that reaches everyone, and encourage the use of birth control and family planning, which people will naturally want as their economic status increases and as they realize that they can do things other than have families, and that as children become more expensive and as they themselves do more things in their own lives. And economic development, of course, seems to be a good correlate to all of these things. In other words, economic development is a good indicator that the other things have happened. Not always perfect, but a pretty good one. So the first effect of economic development is population growth. And why is that? Because when an economy starts to develop, death rate goes down. And people don't adjust their birth rates quickly, so you now get population growth. Later on, as improved food and education combine with increasing expense of children and increasing sense of security in your life, it creates a decline in natality or birth rate. And this idea that this would follow economic development was first proposed in 1919. And this idea is called the demographic transition. That with economic development, first death rates decline, and then later birth rates decline. This is an important idea. The demographic transition is hypothesized to occur in 4 stages. The first stage is the pre-industrial stage, in which there's high birth and death, then the transitional stage, then the industrial stage, and then the post-industrial stage. And let me go through these with you. You can see here is the pre-industrial country, and it has a high birth and death rate, and they're approximately equal, so the population does not grow much. Here then, with economic development, with the transition to an more economically developed nation, death rate starts to drop, birth rate stays the same for a while, and population growth increases. Then, as people enjoy the benefits of economic development and live lives larger than just subsistence, the birth rate starts to drop for numerous reasons. And then finally, in a post-industrial society, birth rate and death rate once again become somewhat in equilibrium with each other. And in many countries, we have now seen a negative birth rate where people are not quite reproducing themselves, which to those people who think the earth is currently overpopulated for any of a number of reasons, that would be a good thing, for a while at least. So this is the economic transition model writ large in a graphic, and that's a graphic you should become very familiar with. So does the demographic transition really occur? I know we've seen the Hans Rosling film, and you would probably guess that it does. I'm going to present you with some of the evidence. Do birth rates really fall with increasing affluence? Yes, as long as the affluence is spread around the population. In other words, income inequality cannot be too large. If income inequality is large, then you could still have a large portion of the population that's reproducing at a higher rate. And this is part of the issue that causes the United States to have a higher birth rate than would be expected. Yes, it's true, as long as people feel more secure in their lives, as long as their economic prospects are better, their children survive, etc., that kind of security, that will cause birth rates to fall. Virtually every developed country now is at or below ZPG, the United States being on the high end. Earlier we saw a slide of total fertility rate versus income, and we saw that as income goes up, as per capita income goes up, total fertility rate drops. In the next slide, we can see how the demographic transition happened at very different times in very different countries because of the effect of poverty. So here we can see back in 1800 that Bangladesh and the United States had approximately the same birth rate. But with industrialization in the United States, by 1900, the birth rate had dropped to half of what it was a century earlier. And by 19 70 or so in the United States, it was somewhere below replacement rate. And then since then, it's been hovering just above. Contrast that with Bangladesh, where it stayed high for a long time. And it's only once Bangladesh undergoes national liberation and you have Bangladesh acting as a country on its own, not as a colony, you see this rapid drop in birth rate, in TFR. So we've been making the claim that empowering women slows population growth rate. Just how bad is it for women globally? And so I came upon these statistics that I thought were kind of interesting. Women do most of the domestic work and childcare and provide unpaid health care around the globe, especially more so when they are poor. It's estimated that women do 2/3 of all work on the planet for about 10% of the world's income, and that women own less than 2% of the world's land. Women make up 70% of the poor and 64% of the illiterate. So women have been disproportionately singled out in the poor and the illiterate. Women are often denied education. As of 2010, there were still 900 million girls that do not attend elementary school in the world. They are often discriminated against legally and culturally, and I think you all probably know examples of that, although we can discuss them if you'd like. And as we've already seen, education, ability to earn their own income, ability to control fertility, laws that can create or uphold women's rights, those things will all have a negative effect on fertility. Income inequality is also really an important factor, but it's very hard to find data on it. So I wanted to talk a little bit about this. From what we've seen so far, it seems perfectly logical that economic development can only be effective to the extent that it reaches all people. If there's a large group of people who aren't met, then they will behave in the way that poor people everywhere behave, which is looking out for themselves by having a lot of children. So spreading economic development to all is the opposite side of the coin of not allowing wealth to accumulate to too great a degree. Now, that, of course, means government intervention to reduce disparities in wealth accumulation. One thing we know about the rich is they're very good at getting rich and staying rich and becoming even richer. So another thing that's necessary is an economic safety net for those left out. In other words, if we have a view that poverty is created, we want to change the outlook for poor people, and we want to include them in all of society, then we need to have a safety net for them so that they will be given the tools to pull themselves out of poverty and live a dignified life. And we'll also need programs to meet demands that the market will not meet, such as subsidized food production, subsidized medicine, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a whole set of social programs that come along with economic development. As I said earlier, the evidence for the effect of inequality is very hard to find, but there is some. Here is a graph that shows income inequality on the x-axis as measured by the Gini coefficient, which I'll explain in a second, versus the teen pregnancy rate. And Gini, in this case, measures how unequal income is distributed. A 0 would be complete equality, so that would be down here somewhere of income, everybody the same. And 100 up here would be complete inequality. Well, way up here actually would be complete inequality. So the Gini coefficient ranges from about 20 to 60, 70 in the most extreme countries. And you can see there's a very nice correlation. There's a lot of noise here between increasing inequality and increasing teen pregnancy rate. That once again fits this model that we're building of why people have kids. These are the OECD nations, and we can see in these nations there's a clear correlation. A 2015 study in Brazil found similar results, found that in areas of Brazil where there was more income inequality, there were much higher teen pregnancy rates than in areas of Brazil where there was less income inequality. The same thing has shown up in the United States, actually. Recent analysis of data by a group called the National Survey of Family Growth showed that teenage girls of lower socioeconomic status were more likely to keep their baby in regions of high income inequality than in regions of low income inequality. So that's a little hard to unpack there. So we have to look at the amount of income inequality in an area, then look at the teenage girls who are of low socioeconomic status, and then look at percent of them that keep their baby versus abort their baby. The authors found that, here was their quote, "When a poor young woman perceives that socioeconomic success is not achievable to her, she is more likely to embrace motherhood in her current position. When there is relatively more hope of economic advancement, it is relatively more desirable to delay motherhood and invest in human capital or social capital." In other words, socioeconomic success here is a stand-in for less income inequality. Where there's more income inequality, there's less chance of social environment. The study also showed, and it sounds like the same thing, but it's slightly different, that women of low socioeconomic status are more likely to give birth as a single teen if they live in a region of high income inequality. And the interesting thing in the study was teens of high socioeconomic status are not less likely to get pregnant, but are more likely to experience a pregnancy failure, and that is a euphemism for abortion. So that's it for today. I hope that after today you can see how economic development that leads to real improvements in security and meaningfulness for people's lives, that leads to autonomy of women, that leads to better health care, for example, that leads to education. These are all ways to solve the population problem. It's going to take time, but these are important ways to do it. And I hope you understand the demographic transition model and how that supports these ideas. And as I say, the demographic transition model seems to be well corroborated in the world. In the long run, as Hans Rosling said, we have solved the population problem. Now it's just a matter of implementing it so that it is really solved once and for all. And once we've stabilized population, we can begin a discussion of how to reduce it. Until next time, study hard.